first point I want to make is that as rating agency, we integrate the risks coming with climate, the carbon transition risk, the physical climate risk in our ratings, because we do see that. Temperamental. I'll try to talk a bit louder. I'll try to talk a bit louder if that no? All right. Let's try. Is this any better? Okay. All right. Okay. So that integration in our rating of these risks is thank you. Difficult. Is important for us. We see these as really considerations that absolutely need to be reflected in our ratings. Now, the cost of borrowing that we're seeing for emerging markets, I think similar to the point that Ms. Georgieva was making, reflects credit risks in general. And so to address that cost of borrowing, one way or one set of measures to be taken is really to address credit risk in general, which can be done and which has been done. When we looked at ratings for low-income and lower-middle-income countries over the last 20 years, we have found as many upgrades as downgrades. So these countries that saw an improvement in their credit standing have been able to take measures that strengthen their economy's competitiveness, that strengthen their institutions, that build buffers, financial buffers, to address the challenges of tomorrow. So I think there's a lot of inspiration to be drawn from these instances in the past. Applied to a climate world, climate policy decisions, we really look at the nature of the risks. And here I want to distinguish carbon transition from physical climate risk, because they do appeal to different policies for governments. On carbon transition, we rate a number of emerging market sovereigns that derive today more than 50% of their revenue from hydrocarbon, and even more of their foreign currency earnings. When we look a couple of decades from now, in the world moving towards net zero, then some of these sovereigns face very significant debt sustainability challenges. So the priority there is to diversify the revenue base, diversify the sources of exports in order to be ready for tomorrow. And there is now a window. Hydrocarbon prices are high, and that gives a window to these countries. On physical climate risk, we've engaged with sovereigns, with Egypt and other sovereigns for some time. What we see is that governments have a very good understanding of the risks they face. That is clear. It is still far harder to translate that understanding of the risk into policies, into really climate adaptation plans. As we see these plans evolve, as we see these plans being articulated, then as rating agency, what we're able to do is really look at the broader returns, the financial returns, but also the returns in terms of social stability, in terms of diversification, economic competitiveness. And that is really what would help shore up, mitigate these risks and shore up the credit standing. So, as I said, a broad range. I think if climate is set in a broad policy framework, then I think there's a lot that governments are very familiar with in terms of economic policy, social policy, as well as financial policy that can be drawn upon.
So if I can maybe go back to Ms. Kag and so the role of MDB, two questions. One for Ms. Kag is the role of MDBs. In particular, how can we use MDBs and donor money to scale up? What role can we play? It has been mentioned by Mr. Quinn about the need to lever up. So how can we use those MDBs to do that?
Well, it's interesting because Kristalina and I just had this outside conversation, but she knows our views and I think we share the same. I think the MDBs have a moral and financial responsibility, in a way a de facto political responsibility to be much more risk engaging. And they can do it in many different ways. The traditional way of looking at the AAA rating, so the buffers you need to keep, I think, is not fit for this era and the type of challenge that we face. We could all basically go down in history with safe buffers, best rating, but will perish. So I think the choice is a very different one. And I think there's different ways to basically target concessional and non-concessional resources. We think that that's aligned with Kristalina's point, use surplus resources to facilitate interest rate buy-downs. There are a number of interesting examples by IDBs that have done so, and I think there's an example of the first ILX, Impact Loan Exchange. The IBRD has done that, but a lot more could be taking place, or rather should be taking place. Now is not the time to wait, and I think as a shareholder in an MDB, and many of the MDBs, we expect this of the MDBs. Sometimes politically, domestically, we can't move as fast as an MDB could actually pilot, try, and you have the role and the ability to work across regions. So you can provide proof of concept in developing economies, in emerging markets, and then task us as shareholders from advanced economies, can you partner with me? Can you be the next investor? Can you share the risk? And we would be willing to do so. The IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Trust is another such example. But more people, more countries, so to speak, and investors need to step in. So MDBs, my open invitation but call to action would be embrace the risk, don't document the risk, share the data, provide the policy, but then call us to action. And as a heads up, when we take over the co-chairpersonship of the Coalition for Ministers of Finance on climate change, I will make this one of the clarion calls to action. I think it's unforgivable if we do not.
So, Dr. Mohamed, so what are the Egypt's proposal for MDEs to lower the cost of green finance and overcome these obstacles?
Thank you very much, and I will take what Ms. Kristalina said about building capacity and the standardization of the process of issuing green, whether green bonds or green loans or green financing through the private sector. This is very critical and very important because most of many developing countries, our African continent countries, we don't have this capacity. And when we tried to do it for the first time, it took a lot of effort, and sometimes we did right, sometimes we did wrong. So let me say what I would like to mention, something which is, I believe it was very important, is that there is a standardization was called ICMA, which is a green bond principles. So when we tried to issue the report, we started with the green financing framework, and made all the arrangement and allocated fund to projects aligned, and we have to comply with ICMA bond principles, and the framework has to be revised by leading environmental research called VICU. And after that, we have to hire an international consultant to review the report and to ensure to the investors that we achieved everything. So it was hassle. So what I'm trying to say, if we can really standardize the process, this will be important. Coming back to what the MDBs can do, I will mention one or two points. Number one, the issue of full or partial risk guarantee. I tried to issue a specific bond in one market, international market. They asked me for guarantee. So I went to two MDBs, international financial institutions. I want to guarantee. They said, okay, but the liquidity available for you will be reduced by this amount of guarantee. I said, no, what? What is the point? So we need to encourage MDBs to make some effort about the issue of full or partial guarantee. And I believe that we found that 95% of MDBs, they don't. They only direct funding. And only 5% is for guarantees, whether it is full or partial. So this need to be changed. This is number one. Number two, we found that those who will be given such a guarantee, they can borrow at an average cost lower by 330 basis points. So you can help us on that. You can support us on that without giving us fund or financing. Give us some sort of guarantee so I can lower the cost of financing. So let me say that Kristalina mentioned green premium. Let me bring to your attention that the market has what is called Africa premium. When they penalize the African continent, when they go for the international market for money, why you add this to the African continent? It's because our situation, so if we compare two African countries with the same rate, the same circumstances, but this is an African, there is an African premium, add to the cost. So you are making our life more difficult because we are African borrowing. We have to demolish this idea. We are the same rate, so we get relatively the same price. The capacity building and regulatory and the policy technical support will be crucial for moving forward with green financing. It's an obstacle. Let me finish with this. We have a proposal which would like to focus on the sustainability sovereign debt hub that was proposed by UNICA during the ISP held in Cairo last September. This hub aims to scale performance-linked sovereign debt and reduce the cost of capital for developing nations and therefore enable scaled investment development. And we believe that if you would like, or we would like to encourage all attendant stakeholders to express their interest and to channel any inquiry in the reducing cost of green and sustainable borrowing initiative by scanning the QR code available outside this hall. So this can be an initiative to get together and see how can we reduce the cost for financing or green financing for our developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you. So Managing Director, institution from the perspective of international financial institution and the fund, what mechanism and financial instrument can be actually used to lower the cost for emerging markets?
Let me recognize that we have indeed been faced with this reality today, that not only emerging markets, developing economies are faced with a very difficult situation with limited or zero buffers, but with investments moving to the US because of interest rates increase and the high cost of the expensive dollar, we do have an unusually difficult situation, not just for green financing, but for financing in these countries overall. If we zero in on green financing, there are three avenues that are some developed and some potentially significant. The first one is to get green bonds on scale on the basis of aggregating institutional capacity building support and aggregating the coming to markets of countries. So rather than individual bonds coming one by one, to think about lifting up emerging market presence and marketing it with the collective strength rather than with the strength of each and every country. It is already, it is there, but we have to admit we have not done enough to support emerging markets. And I would really urge the World Bank, an institution with significant experience in green bond issuance, to take this to heart. In parentheses, and I'm going to do a commercial for the World Bank. The World Bank has innovated the very first quality green bond in 2007. It was issued by the World Bank. the very first carbon trade was done by the World Bank. So this is an institution truly skillful. We have to demand that they give this, spread these skills more broadly. Secondly, catastrophe bonds. We have seen really good progress in pooling resources to tap into markets. So if a catastrophe occurs, countries draw down from the insurance. Insurance instruments more broadly in a world of more frequent climate disasters are a must, and we have to work to develop them. Again, the World Bank has a catastrophic bond program for the Caribbean. All countries of the Caribbean clustered together. On the strength of everybody, you reduce the risks. We can think of similar insurance for drought, related disasters, again, clustering countries. And the third one is debt for climate swaps. The discussion here is now in earnest. At the IMF, we have done our own research, and we see potential that we do need to explore. But it would not be fair if we don't say that the really big opportunity for developing countries is in carbon offsets. If carbon offsets, but including blue carbon, if they become an asset class that can be securitized and used to raise money, that would be a major source of financing for the developing world.
Thank you. So I had a few more questions for the private sector. Unfortunately, I know that some panelists have a hard stop at 12, so maybe starting with at the end. So if you had a magic wand, what would be your dream? How would you scale up private finance? One dream.
Magic wand. I'm going to go to the MDBs, and at the moment MDBs, most of them take vertical risk. They do the totality of the financing, all of the risk categories of a project. If I could wave a magic wand, I'd ask them to go horizontal, not vertical. Take risk categories onto their balance sheet, and then the private sector can do the other risk categories. The other thing, a second magic wand, is share your data, because they have a knowledge of government policy in the countries within they operate in. They have a knowledge of projects that is not openly shared with the private sector. So if they're going to take horizontal risk, not totality, what they've got to do is release some of their data into the domain of the private sector, so the private sector can then risk assess the remainder of the risk. They're the two magic wands I'd ask for.
I'll continue on the data side, but the data going towards analysis, and which is getting the case studies, getting the examples, demonstrating what is money well spent. And I think that will help demonstrate the risks, demonstrate the opportunities, and that will help the investor community and certainly us as rating agencies be able to really differentiate between the sound projects and the ones that could be strengthened.
The third magic wand would be sell some of their existing portfolio that's mature, free up capacity to do the next project. There's some are doing it, many are not yet, freeing up existing balance sheet capacity. They're holding on to the term debt all the way through post-development. So that would be the third magic wand.
Are we going on the magic wand story? I have given mine to him, so he waved 3. Look, if I were to have a magic wand, I would make the world move swiftly to adopting carbon price through tax, through trade, through regulations. Because if we don't have it, ladies and gentlemen, we will not meet our Paris commitments. It is impossible to get investments to move on scale and with the speed necessary. So here I am waving it. Let's see. Let's see what is going to happen. Siegfried has an even better magic wand.
No, not at all. I think we also need to be mindful in all the magic wands that we need to tackle the asymmetry of data, but we also need to give a space for countries to catch up. So when you weigh risk, it needs to be a relative risk. The risk that the Netherlands runs is not the same that Egypt runs. So I think the private sector here also needs to be more forward-looking and not only look at the public sector, but also say what is the responsible form of business conduct I'm prepared to deal with risks. So it's a double whammy. That's also the magic one, because we can't do it without private sector finance. We are very limited. Thanks.
Let us work on creating a special market for green financing with all the tools. And this will be a specialized market which will include green bonds, green loans, green facilities from MDBs, and this unified international market with all the different tools for green financing can accelerate the transition to climate change, because it will have different tools, different mentality, different strategy to ensure the acceleration of green financing for green projects.
If all these dreams come true, I think we solve a big piece of the puzzle today. I want to thank the panelists for being here, and at 12 exact, we can end the panel. Thank you very much.
كيف الحال؟ اخبارك تمام؟ الله يسلمك الله يخليك. Hello, I'm Nuno. I don't think you remember me from the South. All right. You came from Saudi here?
Oh, no, I was in Stephen's office.
Oh, you were in Stephen's office. Okay.
Then I moved to Todd's office there. And then
We're in
now
Egypt
I
now.
moved to GFANS.
Oh,
The
okay.
North African lead for the
For
African
Jafans.
network.
Okay. Congrats.
Thank you.
Congrats. Yes. Well done.
All right. All right. You done?
Yeah, okay. Well done.
أبيض. عمال ادور على المي.
اتخضيت. طب انا عايزه اقعد ناس، عايزه اتكلم، عايزه اقعد ناس تديني ميه حضرتك.
انا عايز اكون واقف عايز اجيب.
Welcome the panelists to come to the stage. Just say like.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, would you please take a seat so we can begin?
معلش لما يجي يمسكوا المايك حضرتك يقولوا هنا دي كده بيفصل. لما بيمسكوا كده من تحت كده دي بتفصل الانسان. طب ما انا بيلاقوه كده يقول لك المايك كده في حاجه.
I'm here for Axel Van Schwarzenberg. Nice to see you. Good afternoon. I'm Georgia. I'm with Axel Van Schwarzenberg. Oh, where would you like me to sit?
Hi, how are you?
Anywhere, wherever you would like to. It's an honor.
We'll sit here.
Hello. Hello. Good morning.
Hi, hi. Okay, Mr.
Jean. Yeah.
Jean.
Jean.
Jean?
Jean Li Chun.
Jean Lichun. Okay, please.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark Susan. No,
The moderator is coming.
Not here yet.
She is, yeah,
Okay.
very song
So we're not. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Vera,
it's-
right.
Yeah.
Mark Susan is my boss. He's on
Yeah.
the way. Just
Okay.
letting you know.
Okay, perfect.
Probably 5 minutes. I think we'll be okay,
I
right?
think it's once he comes, he just like comes
Walks straight up.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I'll introduce him as part of the panel, and just once he comes, he just
Yeah.
can have a seat.
Great.
That should be okay.
Good. Thank you.
so much. Thank you.
You should go to China and then you spend 2 weeks.
That's a
Calling. So this must be you looking for me, and so
no.
she's calling me.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, she does. It's
Hello.
okay. So you'll sit.
I
and-
sit here?
Yeah, you're the moderator. Yeah.
Mais tu le fais pour moi. Tu peux le faire pour moi? Non, c'est bon.
Start something.
You want to sit here? It's fine.
No, anywhere.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hi, I'm Marwa. I need to introduce the panel. So,
Please do.
so you are. I'm sorry.
I'm Vessel. Vessel.
Okay, okay, thank you so much, Mr. Besson. Thank you so much. I'll start. Where's Mark? He's coming. Okay. Thank you so much. So, after we discussed earlier the importance of mobilizing finance for climate action and the urgent need to narrow the current gap in Paris-aligned financial flows to address climate change in a holistic approach that enhances the realization of SDGs. Now, we will discuss the special role of MDPs, commercial banks, and philanthropies in unlocking climate finance. Please welcome with me Dr. Vera Songwei, Co-Chair Independent High-Level Expert Group on Scaling Up Investment and Finance, our moderator for the session. Then we have with us Mr. Jean Liguin, President of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We have Dr. Benedict Arama, CEO, Afrexim Bank. We have Mr. Axel von Trottesenberg, Managing Director Operations, World Bank. We have with us Mr. Basil Heaney, CEO of Mr. Insurance, and will join us in 2 minutes, Mr. Mark Sodman, CEO, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Vera.
Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. I must start by saying that this morning we had a couple of panels where we had more women than men. Now we have more men than women, but you know, we're trying to balance, means more women need to get into the green space, so we'll have them on the panels. But it's a really, really good pleasure to see all of you. We all know each other. And this morning in one of the panels that we had, we were launching the report that myself and Professor Stern just finished, called Finance for Climate Action. You all are financiers, and so, and particularly you're in the multilateral development banks, except of course, Mr. Heaney, I'll come to you. We are calling for $1 trillion in external financing between now and 2030 in that report. And essentially $2.4 trillion of collective financing, which includes domestic capital financing, but $1 trillion of external financing. Of the $1 trillion of external financing, we are saying that at least 180 billion, so we have to triple the multilateral development bank financing to be able to get there. So it's quite a substantial amount. I'm going to break protocol. I think David just brought my coffee, and I'm going to take the coffee because coffee is good for everybody every once in a while. Thank you, David. So we're saying that we have to do that. We have Axel, of course, you're the largest multilateral development bank in the room. Of course, China is part of this with the AIIB, and I'll come to the infrastructure part. And then we also talk about what the private sector can do and what philanthropy can do. And I will come to President Orama as well, because not only are you a bank, but you're also a bank that is pushing trade, to talk a little bit about what is your role in that space. But before I start, the World Bank has also, or the first person I want to go to is you, Axel. The World Bank also released a report where you studied about 30 countries, looking at what is needed. I think we are all talking about the same orders of magnitude of financing. What more do you think the World Bank, multilateral development banks can do? Do you think that if you got this additional capital, and part of what we say in the report is that we need additional financing for the multilateral development banks, particularly through special drawing rights. But what is your take on what you have seen in the 30 countries that the World Bank studied in this recent report, and what can additional financing do for us?
Well, first of all, very good to see you, Vera. What the World Bank has done over the last 12 months is start a whole series of analytical reports called Country Climate and Development Reports. So very important, linking climate and development for about 24 countries. And the report Vera is referring to is a synthesis report. What is, I think, important, Vera, is what you are seeing is there is a difference what kind of additional investments over time, for example, China needs, as then the low income. So that is, if you express it in terms of GDP, you will see that China more towards the 1%, but the low income countries is like 8%. And also middle income countries 5%. So let's be also very clear, we need to be nuanced. Now, starting with the low income countries, because the fear is that particularly the low income countries are going to be left behind. They have been already been left behind, and therefore I think there is an attempt to focus on Africa in this COP is highly desirable, but what has to be done is that in the African context, when we talk about an extra 8 percentage point of GDP, that mainly will need to come from external resources. And when I'm talking about external, is concessional resources. So I think there, quite frankly, can that be done? My view is, yes, it can be done, but that requires political will to pay up. I think certainly we have had for IDA 20, that is a 3-year replenishment cycle that we have, we mobilized 93 billion, but only 23.5 billion came directly from donors. So if you are looking at that delta, that means that the donor contributions have to increase substantially in the next rounds. And I think that is the first for it. Secondly, for the middle income countries, that will have to be served over the IBRD. Now, when you talked about the $1 trillion, do I believe that it is possible? Yes. But it will require additional money. Now, I think if you take a World Bank or an IBRD, people think, well, that will require a lot of money. Well, let me tell you that the paid into the IBRDs in 75 years was $21 billion. So I think that allowed us to lend a cumulative over $800 billion over this period of time. I think that if there were to be extra resources on this, you could do that. And that would be, namely, to be the part of the discussion, what is the level of ambition by our membership? And that is the key question. I think that the international community should look that the Multilateral Development Bank, and it is not only the World Bank, it's the Asian Development Bank, it's the AIB and others, they have one thing, they are good leveraging machines. And therefore, with relatively little paid in, you could have an enormous mileage. And that should be last word. The problem with the middle income countries is that people are talking a lot about blended finance. But the blended finance for middle income countries is very difficult to mobilize. There is a lot of talk. We need to be realistic, and I think we need to really say what can we actually also promise middle income countries as about only talk. And the last thing is, it is very important that when we are talking about concessional resources, and particularly grant resources, they should not be taken away from the low-income countries. Because the low-income countries, they need for poverty-related investments and climate. And we shall not deny them this money. So it's very important that there is no game played on the back of the poorest countries.
Thank you, Axel. I think you hit the nail on the head. We need to segment the kind of capital that we're talking about and what is going to who. In the report that we just released, Finance for Climate Action, we actually do that. So we have the MDBs and sort of more ODA money, which is grant money, where we talk then about IDA, we talk about getting more SDRs, and getting a little bit more long-term financing, particularly when we talk about loss and damage. You know, we know that there are categories in the climate conversation where we don't yet have, we do have a few. I don't subscribe to the conversation that says resilience, loss and damage, adaptation is not, the market's not interested in anything around that. There's a few things that are still bankable, but not as many. We do need a lot of public capital and concessional capital to go into it. We do talk about the indebtedness. There's no point adding more debt to very low income countries that need even more. I want to turn to you now, Mr. Lee Quinn, from the Asian Investment Bank. I think that what we know about, you know, you created this new mega institution that is now a multilateral development bank. You're lean, you're efficient, and Axel would say that he's your back office because he does a lot of the back office work for you. But that's one of the things we talk about in the report is the partnerships that the MDBs need to work together to do this. Can you tell us a little bit about your role as a new MDB, a more flexible MDB, benefiting, of course, and pulling from, you know, the knowledge of the World Bank in particular? I know that because I know that a lot of Joachim and others have come there, but we are also providing back office services to you. How do you see your role with additional financing? We're talking about cheaper financing. The middle income countries need concessional financing. The IMF has just done the RST, which is very low financing, still debt, at 30 years. What are your terms? And do you contend that you are part of the sort of first entry layer of financing for climate?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Vera. First of all, I'd like to thank Axel for the support you have provided us from day one. And I have really enjoyed a great cooperation with the World Bank group. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to continue working to deal with climate change issue. We've been talking about financing, but let me try to expand this a little bit. I think financing is one thing, using of the resources, application of the resources, the most effective way is no less important. We should look at both. And it seems that over the years, there's not sufficient financing resources have been mobilized to deal with climate change. You know why? Individually, as a household, as an institution, as a state, they all behave by one basic principle. They all allocated resources for the most important thing. So my belief is the amount of the resources we can mobilize for climate change mitigation and adaptation is the function of the awareness of the urgency of this issue. If you really believe climate change is not something which will be looming large on the horizon, climate change is not something simply brewing, fermenting, slow moving, you don't have any sense of urgency. Only when you understand climate change and its consequences here, now, so you know we have to do it. For instance, this year, Pakistan, 1/3 of the country is underwater. This is not something within our living memory. In China last year, Henan province flooded, has never ever happened. And I don't have to enumerate these kind of things. So we should understand climate change's consequences here. Nobody can escape it. That is the very basis for us to make up a mind to allocate resources for climate change mitigation and adaptation. Now, coming to our bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We were born into the 21st century right after the Paris Agreement was entered into, just a couple months later. And over the last 7 years, we have been allocating resources for environmental protection,